Welcome to the Sisterhood Podcast. My name is Megan Brueseke, and I am so glad that you are here. This month's episode is a special one that we recorded live at our Sisterhood Conference, April 19th and 20th. I got the opportunity to sit down with one of our guests, Dr. Donna Pisani, and talk about leadership. Donna has over 40 years of ministry and leadership experience, and she shares some of what she has learned with us in this conversation. She recently wrote a book that'll be coming out this fall called Entrusted to Lead, sharing some biblical wisdom and insights on women in leadership, as well as just some incredible things that she's learned that she wants to pass on to help those of us who lead even better. And so, would you join me now for this special episode of the Sisterhood Podcast? Well, hey, everybody. We are so excited to have our Sisterhood podcast live this year at Sisterhood Conference. This past year, we started a podcast, and we have been talking each month about different issues and things that are going on in our lives, and you've got to hear from so many incredible women in our church. And I'm excited because today we're going to talk with Dr. Donna Pisani about leadership. And you know, Donna has been leading in the church for over 40 years, ministering with her husband in missions and leading a church together that they just recently transitioned. She is a leader of leaders, and she is incredible in my life. And so I'm so grateful to get to ask you some questions today. Thanks for being on the Sisterhood Podcast. Thank you.
It's such an honor. And I just wanted to say publicly that you're so bricky.
I'm impressed. That was quick. Oh, awesome. I don't even know what to do with that.
Just threw you off, sorry.
So, bricky. Brave.
Yes.
I'll take it.
Well, it means
bricky means brave, right?
Brave, yes.
I'll take
that's
it.
Who you
yeah,
are.
Absolutely.
Don't you think she is? Yes. Exactly.
That's how you like get a word in your vocabulary, right? You learn
Yes.
it, and then you start using it in a sentence immediately.
Yes,
Okay.
I think we should all say that.
First leadership lesson from Dr. Donna.
I'm bricky.
You are so bricky.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we're just going to start with a few questions and just have a conversation. So I would love for you, can you just share with us some of your personal journey in leadership? How has it shaped who you are today?
So first I want to kind of just define leadership in this regard, because I think a lot of my life in the beginning years, I didn't think that I was a leader, but I think every woman in this room, myself included, you are leading, whether you realize it or not, because you're influencing somebody. So I think it's important to embrace that as an identity. And honestly, the way Jesus defined leadership was servant leadership. I think really leadership really involves honing followership, because you're following Jesus. And Jesus was a servant leader, so we're going to be like him, so we're just going to serve others. So that's really what leadership is. My journey was, my husband always felt like we should lead together. I was incredibly insecure. I would cross the street rather than having to talk to you. If you asked me to pray publicly, I would always look at the ground. You know, during the prayer meetings when they're like, look, you can tell they're looking for somebody to pray, and I'm like looking at the ground, or
like, don't call on me.
Don't call on me. Or we used to travel and preach in the early days before we pastored, and so we'd go into a church, and Dennis, I would make sure I was nursing a baby when he was beginning his message, and then he would, because I knew he was going to call me up to share something or pray for somebody, and I was horrified that would happen. And he just kept encouraging me, and he kept saying to me, you can either hide the gifts that God's given you and you've been entrusted with, or you can begin to use them. And he said, at the end of the day, God gave them to you for a reason. Yeah. So his encouragement helps me. So that was kind of my journey, was if God's given me these gifts, if he's entrusted me at great cost, right? The cross, like, so he died for me to have these gifts. I have to choose what I'm going to do with them. So even if it's imperfect. So that's kind of my journey. It's kind of like, then if I'm going to be a leader, what am I going to do to hone that gift? So it's given to us, but then we have to grow it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pastor Jessica's message.
Yeah.
So we in a chrysalis or a butterfly? How encouraging was it that the butterfly lives 10 days?
But a beautiful tendon.
Yes. Reproducing. Yes.
I love that you shared that, because I think a lot of us can relate to that, of like, we might feel like we have a gift. We might feel like there's something that God's put inside of us, but we're scared to use it. We're intimidated.
I would say I was a reluctant leader.
Yeah.
In the beginning.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, what advice would you give to women in leadership roles, or those who aren't in a leadership role, but they desire to lead? They want to grow in their leadership in whatever that looks like in their life, but they feel held back by insecurity, doubt.
Yeah.
You know, those thoughts of, not me, I can't.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
I would say, well, first of all, I always felt personally like I was 2 brain cells short of smart. Like I didn't feel smart. And so I didn't feel qualified to lead. And so I think a couple things was that I had to, first of all, if one of the biggest last night we talked about indicators or intimidators, so I had to identify what was intimidating me from being a leader, and then discover that behind that fear, that insecurity, or that feeling not smart enough, behind it, there's usually a calling, there's usually an assignment that's trying to stop you from what you're doing. So then maturity is, as you begin to grow, is you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on what that is, and then I'm going to begin deciding what I need to do about that, so that is no longer a stumbling block, but a stepping stone to move into whatever God has for me. And so I started just, like, I needed confidence.
Yeah.
And so I just started doing Bible studies, reading books, doing whatever I could to build my confidence. One of the other ways to build your confidence is to just serve where you are. So good. I think sometimes leadership feels like it's the pinnacle, but leadership is just what you evolve into as you develop the gifts God's already given you by serving somebody else. Yeah. And so it's usually in the anonymous places. It's usually, like, I don't think the platform is the prize. Yeah. I don't. I think it's part of the journey, but if you just allow God to transform you by serving somebody, and sometimes serving is hard. Well, often it's hard, and it can be messy because you're working with people, and people aren't always easy to work with, right? Yeah. You know, I remember saying, when you're serving, usually you're serving with other people that are hurting, and hurting people hurt people. Yeah. And so, but that's not an excuse to stop.
Right.
I just want to say, like, if you've been hurt or relationships, keep going, figure it out, push past it, forgive them, and just ask God to heal you. And I'm not discounting pain or anything that you may have walked through. I'm just saying sometimes we allow that to define us. But I found that leadership was formed in the small spaces where maybe it's like just leading in children's program. I think I started there. I didn't realize I was leading, I was just serving. And then because I was good at that, then there was outreach in our neighborhood where our church was. There was just a lot of disadvantaged children that needed to be mentored. So I just started serving there. Brought my 4 kids with me, did a sidewalk Sunday school on Saturday mornings. We went knocking on doors, picking up crack bags and condoms off the ground with my kids, played rap music, to which my kids threatened me and said, do not be on the platform trying to dance to this because it will not attract anybody. So, but you just do what's before you. Yeah, and oftentimes I found that if you see something that's considered a problem, it's usually an opportunity that God's inviting you into to be a part of the solution. So if you just serve, you watch what God will begin to transform and develop in you. I think that's like a continuation of both of your messages today. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I just think it's just be faithful where God's called you to be, and don't do just enough to get by. Go above and beyond.
Yeah.
It's the above and beyond, the second mile, where God grows you the most.
Yeah, and I love what you said about, like, not letting insecurity or hurt or it being hard hold us back, right?
Yes.
Just because it didn't feel natural to you doesn't mean you weren't called to it, right?
Yes.
And to be able to push through the hard parts, to keep moving forward when it didn't feel comfortable or easy.
Yeah.
God still had something for you. I think a lot of times we think, well, it's easy for her. Yes. She's just naturally good at that. And I think a lot of times if you get to have a conversation with her, whoever that her is, you'll find it's not necessarily true. Yeah. Didn't necessarily come easy. But if God's put some leadership in us, if he's called us to serve in some capacity, then he's going to keep equipping us even when it's hard, even when we hit a roadblock, even when a challenge arises, it's going to grow us.
Yeah. I think Yeah, and I think it's just developing that. Like, I never felt like 100% secure in communication. And I read this one scripture, I think it's in Exodus, where God said to Moses, who had a speech impediment, he said to him, I will be with your mouth. I was like, okay. Yeah. Thank God, because sometimes I'm saying things that I really need you to be a part of. But it just, I think the other part of that, Megan, is just get in the Word and allow the Word to transform you as well. But that gave me confidence then. Okay, I don't know that I have the ability to communicate, but I want to grow this ability. I'm still trying to grow it. I don't think you ever reach, like you were saying, you think some people just have it and other people don't. I always felt like I was the one who didn't have it. But I think you just have to keep growing. You can learn anything. That's the amazing thing about our brain, our spirit, and our soul is you can consistently grow.
Yeah.
And then ask questions. So how did you overcome anything? Did you find it hard?
Absolutely. I think, we've talked about this. I've talked about this before. Like, speaking doesn't come easy to me. I had a very similar experience to you of, my husband would say, hey, Megan's going to close us in prayer. And I'm like, which Megan? That was not, it didn't come naturally to me. It was more just called out of me. And a continued obedience.
Say that. That's so powerful. It was called out of you.
It was just called out of me, and I had to say yes. And there were times I didn't. There were times where I look back now and I'm like, oh, that was a moment, that was a season, a situation where God wanted to prepare me.
Yeah.
And I said no. And now I'm in a season where He's still calling me to that thing, but it's harder. Because I didn't do the work in the season where He was trying to pull me in.
Wow.
And
Sue, that's so good.
I think those hidden seasons where you think nobody sees, God wants to develop us and form us. And when we, He's not going to give up. He's going to keep calling you. He's going to keep pulling things out of you. But my encouragement is to listen, to be obedient, to get up scared, do it scared. Have the conversation. I think a lot of times leadership is just being willing to have a hard conversation.
Yes.
Which is hard for all of us. Yeah. I don't think, if you think that's easy for somebody else, it's not. It's hard for all of us. But just consistently saying, God, I'll let you use me, and I'm going to do it, and it's going to be for you. And then I see that he did. And so then I'm like, okay, well, you did it then. You're going to do it again, right? Like, I just keep saying yes.
Yeah, keep saying yes.
Yeah.
And if you've had nobody call it out of you, just keeps, like, we call it out of you right now in Jesus' name. Because you just think how incredible it'd be if every one of us in this room actually had that yes posture. I mean, you just think about the kingdom of hell that would just be shaken just by you in this room, no matter what your role looks like. So
yeah. And I think, I love that you said that. Like, it doesn't matter what your role looks like. We're not talking about women who preach on a platform at a church. Like, leadership looks like so many different things. So many of you are leaders in our community. You're leaders in a school. You're leaders in your home. You're leaders in your business. You're leaders of so many different things. You're leaders of small groups. You're leaders of just the people that God has put in your life, and you have a significant calling, every single one of you. And so I love how you just speak so much life and so much encouragement, specifically into women in leadership, and saying, like, you women, you are called to lead. Woman, you are called to lead, because sometimes we haven't heard that, or we haven't seen that, or the spaces we're in are not so filled with females who are leading. And so I love that you do that. And, so I'd love to hear from you, like, what unique strengths and perspectives do you see that women can bring in leadership that are missing when we're not willing to step into those places?
Well, I mean, of course it depends on your personality. I'm big Enneagram, so it depends on, and StrengthsFinder, so it depends on what you bring to the table. But the early church in the book of Acts was built by men and women. The book of Romans, chapter 16, which is the chapter that most of us maybe ignore because it's just Paul commending he just mentions names. And I remember I always skip that because I was like, I don't know who these people are and I don't really care about them, so it doesn't matter, right? Like, who cares? Let's skip on. I'm not inspired by these people at all.
I need some action.
Yeah,
Where's
right?
the action?
Yeah, give me a nugget of truth. But if you look at the names that he mentions that were part of building the early church in Rome, out of the 26 names, I believe it's 12 of them are women, which are listed as co-leaders. So the early church, and then you look at Priscilla and Aquila, her name was mentioned first, which in that literary style often meant that she was the most prominent. They were prominent leaders in the church together. They were part of building the church in Ephesus. And so when you look at the scriptures in Timothy that try to, I'm sorry, I'm spinning out all this stuff that my head's been in, because I just think that through centuries, theology has tried to shut women down and make you feel like you're the weaker vessel, or the vessel, that's King James, with the weaker side of humanity, and you're not. If you look how Jesus redeemed men and women, together they built a church. I mean, just think about this one thought. I'm a little scattered because I had a muffin. Hilarious. If you just think about this, the Great Commission, when the last word Jesus spoke as he was going up to heaven, the Great Commission had no gender attached to it. And then you look at the first sermon that Peter preached on the day of Pentecost, which was the birthing of the church. There were hundreds of prophetic words throughout history that had been fulfilled in this one moment and through the life of Jesus. But the message that Peter spoke at the birthing of the church was, your sons and your daughters will prophesy. So the message that was spoken over the church was men and women together. Yeah. So it is essential, because we both carry the image of God, that we as men and women actually use our giftings together, because if it's only men, then you're only seeing one part of the image of God. So what do women offer? I do think we offer a nurturing side, although there are men that are very nurturing. So I try to be careful to not just put characteristics that are solely feminine or solely masculine, because there's women in this room that you're all different in personality. But what you do offer is you offer the image of God. Yeah. And together, that's what God's plan was for building the church and reaching the Great Commission. It requires both genders, male and female, man and woman, whatever you want to call it in the culture today. It requires men and women together. And so whatever your specific gifting is, so you may be super administrative, you may be like you love people, hospitality, it may be that you're, whatever it is, the myriad of all the different personalities and strengths, none of them are insignificant. Do you know why? Because God gave them to you. Yeah. Any qualities that you have, any strengths, anything that you have, you didn't develop it. Your parents didn't give it to you. It could be like down through the genetic line. We're all blank, 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 blank. God gave that to you. Yeah. And so because God gave it to us, we've been entrusted with it. So I do think, yeah. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I love that you said that. Like, it's not that there's some specific, list of how a woman should be as a leader. Yes. It's you. It's the uniqueness of you that's missing when you're not stepping into leadership. It's the uniqueness of the way that you reflect the image of God in your skill set, in your ability, in the talents and the gifts that God gave you to use.
Yeah, and so then I went from being very quiet to then just like talking too much. So, there was this whole thing that to be a Christian woman, you just needed to be really quiet and demure and just hold your peace and just, have everything perfectly in place. And that was not me. I couldn't fit into that box. And so I just think to be a woman of God is to be who God created you to be and be free in that and have permission to be who God created you to be. Yeah. The second thing is you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to be perfect. What allows us to be part of a perfect plan is a perfect God. Yeah. So if you're trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect boss, the perfect employee, the perfect whatever your roles look like, that perfection is overrated. I have a PhD in perfectionism. I think The problem with perfectionism is we don't start because we're afraid we won't do it perfectly.
Yeah.
So I just want you to throw that down, let it be under your feet. Do the very best that you can with your entire heart.
Yeah.
Because you've been entrusted by one who loves you the most. But don't let perfectionism be a inhibitor or a limitation to you just starting. And if you stepped out once and it wasn't perfect, and now you're again, up in the middle of the night thinking about whatever you did that wasn't perfect, I'm telling you from experience, perfection will shut down the gifts that God's given you. Don't let that happen.
Yes.
Do it. Say yes, even if it's imperfectly, because you will do it imperfectly.
Yeah.
From 40 years, I've done it imperfectly my whole life. But I want to stand in front of Jesus one day and hear him say, you know what? You said yes, and grace covers and meets you where you are. I think he's going to be more honored with my yes than my perfection.
Yes, that's good. Absolutely. Donna, you've been leading in a church setting, in a ministry setting for 40 years. And, that's not a space that women have been leading in a lot in our culture, right? For a long time, you were kind of one of the only ones you knew doing what you were doing. What do you say to someone young in their leadership who's maybe feeling like they're the only one, or what did you learn early on in leadership, or what do you wish someone had told you, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, early on in your leadership that would have helped you?
It's a good question. I would encourage you to buy my book that's coming out in October. I'm going to put it up on the
We
screen.
do have the QR code coming up in just a minute. You can put it up now. There it is.
So you can actually, and while it's called Entrusted to Lead, again, every one of you in here is a leader in some way or another. And this book is full of 40 years of what I wished I'd known that nobody told me. First one is we're going to, in the book, we'll talk about, this is not a marketing moment, but it sounds like it, but because I can't answer that question.
But we're also thankful you wrote this book.
Okay.
This book doesn't exist. There's not well, it does exist. You very much worked on it.
Pretend. It's like it's not really there.
As a woman in leadership, there's just not a lot of this out there.
No.
And we're grateful for you to use your wisdom, use all the experience to share what you've learned. So
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, so the first half of the book is the theology or it's an easy to read, here's what Jesus says about you, and I want you to know how empowered and loved you are. Second half is 4 life lessons. So if I were to pick one of those life lessons of something I wished I'd known, it would be find your kind of smart. And so, and that chapter is all about, again, I felt 2 brain cells short of smart a lot of my life, which is one of the reasons why I went back to school. But what I discovered also is even in the story of the talents, you remember the talent story? There's one, I'm gonna say girl, that had 5 talents, one girl that had 3 talents, and one that had 3, 5, 3, I just wrote this, I don't even remember, 5, 3, and 1, 5, 2, and 1. Well, anyways, there's this graduating degree of talents. And so I had the one talent my entire life in my head. Does anybody else feel like you have the one talent? 3 people, that's great. The rest of the room. And so I constantly kept looking at the 5 and the 3, thinking that they had it all together and they were amazing. And if I could only be as sparkly and as beautiful and as special and as smart as they were, then I could actually multiply my talents. The interesting thing about that Bible story is that they were given the talents according to their abilities. God will never give you more than what you can handle. When we feel like we only have one, we feel entitled to more before we start. See, entitlement isn't just a you owe me, like a prideful thing. An entitlement often has an insecurity attached to it. Like, I can't start because this is too small, so we hide it and bury it. But in this story, the master it wasn't about the size of the gift. It was about what you do with the gift that you're given.
That's good. Yeah.
And so if you feel like you've been given less abilities than somebody else, don't bury it, use it. Because your leadership, your gifting, your talent will only grow when you invest it and serve somebody else.
Yeah.
If you don't, it becomes almost like a disability. So God will multiply your abilities when you use what you've been entrusted with. It becomes a disability when you just hide it for the rest of your life.
That's so good.
And I just want to say to you, some of you are waiting for more before you start, but you're never going to get the more till you start.
Yeah, that's good.
What was the question? So that for me was like finding you're kind of smart. I wished I had done this sooner. I wished I had stopped comparing what my gifts were with somebody else's because it kept me from doing anything God was calling me to do. Comparison is the worst.
Yeah.
It's super easy on your phone. Like you see somebody else's highlight reel and you're like, my life sucks. Like you felt good in the morning when you woke up and you had time with Jesus, and then you open up your social media and you're like, my life sucks. Comparison's the worst. Stop comparing yourself. Work really hard on building who you are.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that's probably one of the main life lessons. And I think probably the other one would be don't quit, but develop grit. Yeah, I think that's really powerful because they've done studies and they found that some of the most successful people, we always think it's because of their talent, but it's not their talent, it's because they've had grit. So you look at some of the most famous painters who were incredible, but these masters developed their gifts because of grit. They just kept going. Some of the athletes that we know that we respect developed grit. They weren't that great to begin with. So it's just a matter of don't give up. Be a gritty girl. Be gritty. Just keep going.
That's good.
Don't stop.
I love it. Thank you. So a lot of people in here, as women in general, we have a lot on our plates. We have a lot of responsibilities, leadership, family, friends. We're mothers, we're daughters, we're sisters, we're friends, we're leaders. How did you balance? How do you balance all those areas of your life and leading and your family and church and home and whatever? What do you say to that?
I didn't.
It's fair.
I think balance is overrated. I think there's different seasons of your life that look different.
It's good.
So I think you have to establish for me, it was establishing my values. My husband and I did this together, like what were the core values in our life? And then for that season, we'd always have to check back in and see like, well, when our kids are little, I have to be careful how much I'm doing. Because to be honestly, you are Martha and Mary. So you still have to run a house. You still have to watch your kids. Your husband may help you with that, and that's awesome, but you have to do you. So there's a season that sometimes you're not going to get another season with your kids like this when they're little. So take that time. So Jesus first, my marriage, and then kids. But church, here's the thing is I don't look at it as a priority list from top to bottom. I look at it as Jesus is in the middle and every other part of my life touches Jesus.
That's good.
So that to me was balance.
Yeah.
And so when you start, so you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to set up this system right now. And sometimes there's just going to be pressure and there's going to be tension because you can't control your kids or your life, or you can't control the schedule sometimes. You try as much as you want to.
Yeah. I love what you said about that, different seasons, like there's just different seasons, and sometimes we are discouraged because we're comparing our season, or we're comparing ourselves to someone else who's in a very different season.
Really
and we're like, well, I should be able to do what she's doing. Why can't I do that? And we just like discourage ourselves. We keep shame on ourselves. And the reality is you may be called to whatever that is. You may have a season where that is going to be the way that you lead, and that's what it's going to look like. But it may not be this season, because this season calls for a different type of leadership. It calls for a different focus. Yeah. And so what you said about, reevaluating, checking back in, is this still working? Is this how I should be leading? Where do I need to give and take more? It's not so much balance, so much as continually evaluating.
And then I think part of it in that season is, what are the things that only I can do that nobody else can do? So then there's a lot of things that sometimes you're doing that you could probably release to somebody else to do, or you don't have to do. So for instance, I'm the only one who can sleep with my husband. I'm not gonna forget about that. because I love him, but also I don't want anybody else sleeping with him. So I'm the only mom to my kids, right? So, whatever it looks like, there's moments when you have to, maybe you have somebody else come in and help you with your kids or whatever that looks like, but you're just paying attention. And again, I didn't do it perfect, and you may not be doing it perfect, but you're going to do the best you can right now in this season. And this is what I've said to my adult kids is I don't know that I did that season right, but what I do know is I loved you with everything that was in me, and I did it the very best that I could. Mm-hmm. If I could have the knowledge, right? If I could have don't you feel like that too?
I am trying.
Yeah.
Mine are still little, still growing up. Yeah. But I am, like, that's my goal, is that in every season, I'm doing my best. And I'm loving them, and I'm parenting them in the way that I feel God is leading me to. And I know I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. Yeah. And I'm going to trust God for his grace. In fact, you have told me before, and I'd love for you to share this if you would, about something you did with your kids then when they were older. Do you know what I'm talking about? When you went back and asked them questions?
Yes. Yeah.
Would you share about that? Because I think that's really powerful. There's a lot, there's a lot of you in the room with grown children, and I've talked to you, and you're like, I don't know, I didn't get it all right. Yeah. But I love what you shared that you did. Would you share that?
Yep. We went back to I felt a lot of regret for seasons of when the kids were growing up that I didn't think that I had done right. Like, I'm a very driven personality, so I'm driven in whatever direction I'm going in. And so I went back to my kids. So I was meeting with a therapist, and she said to me, well, you don't have to live with this regret. Why don't you go back to your kids and ask them, what did they miss from your motherhood in those seasons? And so I individually sat with each of them and said, hey, what do you wish I had done? Or what did I not do enough of? Or what did I do that you wish was different when you were growing up? And every one of the responses was completely different than the regret that I had been carrying. And it was clarifying. And then when they shared it and I listened to them and I asked more questions, also, by the way, one of the best ways to have conversations with your children or adult children is to just ask questions. And then one of the questions was, okay, what's in your head now about this thing that I didn't do? Talk to me about what you're feeling about that right now. And they would share the whole thing, because I wanted to know the full body of it, not just the surface level of what they had said. And then I said, okay, now what can we do now to make up for whatever that was that you missed? I mean, obviously, if I hadn't gone to a baseball game, but I could go to a Nats game with them. Or generally all of them are like, Mom, we're fine now. It's good. You don't have to do anything else. But all of their answers were completely different, and they all grew up in the same house. Yeah. So you're dealing with different personalities. And then the other thing with adult children I think is so helpful, and I think you can do this with teenagers, is to ask them, who do you need me to be right now? How can I be the mom that you need right now? Mm-hmm. Or the other question is, what's happening in your head right now? Mm. Like when they're, a lot of times teenagers are just, you go through hard places, right? And sometimes you just need somebody to ask you, what's going on in your head right now? How are you feeling? Yeah. Sometimes you don't even know it, but you just need to talk about it. Yeah. So anyways.
I love that you said that, the things that you were kind of beating yourself up about, like that wasn't even what they were thinking about,
Right.
It didn't really, so it's good to like just have the conversations and open up that door. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to wrap up here in just a few moments, but one of the questions that I have as someone who is driven, who, is doing lots of things and leading, and how do you stay whole and healthy and not burn out?
It's a good question. Yeah, what are you doing about that?
Me? Yeah. I want to know what you're doing.
Well, I know, right? Thanks. First of all, I think when you're driven, you forget it's a marathon and not a sprint. So you're like, everything is like immediate, has to happen right now. And I think sometimes with a driven personality, you feel like if I don't do ABC, somebody's going to go to hell, somebody's going to die. Like it almost feels like if I don't do this, the whole world's going to fall apart. Extreme. Yeah. So I think you have to make it a priority to make sure, and I wanted to say this several times, is that you're taking care of yourself. Like, take time to breathe. Take time in the Word. For me, 40 years in, I cannot go a morning without Jesus. Simply because of my insecurities, I was like, I can't handle a day without you. I just need to invite you. You're my first appointment. It's non-negotiable. And again, you crack me up because you're like, I'm going to get up early with Jesus, and then your kids wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, darn, didn't you hear my prayer, Lord? And every season looks different. I mean, some of those moments with Jesus were 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the kitchen table before the kids came in. Sometimes it was while I was cooking dinner. I had worship music on really high. The kids would come in, try to talk to me. I was like, sorry, Jesus is on. Dance, do whatever you want to do, but I need this moment. Jesus is on. I do think it's important to make sure you have safe spaces so that you can talk to a friend. Like, actually, the list that Jessica shared today is fantastic of safe friends, not just for pain, but just somebody you can process with.
Yeah.
But I do think it's have fun, enjoy the journey. We can get so driven about the goal that if we're not careful, we have like dead bodies behind us. We're like, I hit the goal, and then you turn around and you're like, oh, a few people got lost on the trail. But I do think it's really important. When I grew up in ministry or in leadership, you didn't hear a lot about self-care, like take care of yourself. You didn't hear a lot about have fun. Make sure you schedule, like if you're driven, you have to schedule fun in. But it is a marathon, and we want you to be here for the long haul.
Yeah.
We don't want you burn out in the middle, and then you're like so discouraged, and then you're deconstructing your faith, and you're deconstructing church, and when you're burnt out, you're easily hurt. You're like, like 11 o'clock at night, like I can't have intense conversations with my husband because I go to bed and I'm angry, hurt, and everything else. And it wasn't even what he was saying.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, take the time to take care of yourself. Do as much as you can to sleep well. If your kids are little, you will sleep again when they're 18. Maybe.
10 more years.
Yeah, 10 more years, that's it. But take care of you and what you need. And that's why I think the Bible is so important, because it's the inspired word of God, which means breathed into. So it really is an oxygen tank.
Yeah.
So you're hooking yourself up to that oxygen. Take care of you. Like when you're on the airplane and they're like, in case of emergency, you stop listening after a while. You're not even paying attention. But they say, in case of emergency and the oxygen mask drops down, make sure you take it first and then give it to your children. But what we've all been doing in this room is giving it to everybody else. And then we're burnt out at the end of the day. And then one thing happens and we're in a meltdown emotionally and mentally. And we're like, I can't do this. And because we feel like God's asking us to do more than we can handle. But again, he's only going to give you what you can handle according to your ability. And yes, it will stretch you, but there's grace attached to the stretch if it's an invitation from God. Yeah, and one of the best ways to indicate that you're trying to run on your own strength is if you're constantly overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just take an account. I'm constantly overwhelmed, God. Either I'm doing this in my own strength and I'm trying to control it, or I'm doing things you haven't asked me to do. Because we are nurturing, caring women, we oftentimes take on burdens that God hasn't given us. So I just want to encourage you. Have some great, here's the biggest thing. Sorry, we're out of time. Here's the biggest thing right now. Have the same amount of grace for yourself that God has for you.
Oh, that's good. Wow. That's hard.
Yeah.
Having grace for ourselves
Yeah.
is very hard. That's so good. I love what you said, just about taking care of ourselves. Like, sometimes I think we feel like our lives are so full and they're so busy and we don't have time to sit and read God's word, and when am I going to fit that in? But the truth is, if we don't make that appointment, if that isn't the first appointment, the rest of it's like going throughout your day without food. It's like going through your day without oxygen. You're not strengthened in what he has for you. His word is living and active, and it's meant to be consumed by us daily, to where we meet with him and we know him, and he strengthens us and he gives us grace and he gives us the encouragement that we need for what he's called us to do that day. It's necessary and vital to keep strong. And I love what you said about having fun. Having fun is a high priority for me. Taking days off, rest, have fun, laugh with your people. Everything. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
It's a marathon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you guys just thank Donna? I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for your investment in me personally, and I'm grateful for your investment in our church and the women of our church. We're so thankful. I'm thankful. Can you put the book slide up again in case anyone did not scan that QR code? I know that this is a labor of love and obedience, and that the lessons learned that you're sharing were hard fought, and it's paving the way for so many of us, and I'm grateful for the truth that's in it. So you can pre-order it. It's coming out in September. We can all read it together and be encouraged. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Sisterhood podcast. We had such an incredible time at the Sisterhood Conference. I hope that you were able to be a part of it. If you were not able to be there, hey, we are going to be gathering again in October in St. Louis and in Virginia. So we don't have to wait a whole year to get together again, but I hope that you will plan to be a part. We'll see you next month for the Sisterhood podcast.